Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk Astrology. In today's episode, we're going to be exploring the topics of reincarnation, soul, and karma in an astrological context. Joining us today, we have two of our wonderful Kepler teachers, Enid Newberg and Joseph Crane. Enid is a former Kepler College president, and she is an esteemed astrologer and lecturer. And Joseph is a highly regarded astrologer, author and lecturer who has been with the college for the past 15 years. So thank you both so much for joining us today. And how are we doing?
Doing well.
All is good.
Fantastic.
All is good enough.
All is good enough. Wonderful, wonderful. So the first question we've got for you today is on the topic of reincarnation in an astrological context. So Enid, would you like to explain more of the ideas behind the topic?
You find ideas about reincarnation worldwide, and we often think of reincarnation in this kind of, well, you have a specific soul, it comes back as a person, but that is only a tiny slice of what humans have considered about how soul works and how it works in its coming back, whether as human or as another animal, whether it's somebody you recognize and go out to search for, like with the Dalai Lama, or is going to be a relative. There's a whole sequence of possibilities. I know a lot of times I often laugh and say, why do I need another life? I've lived at least 4 or 5 of them in this lifetime. That's been difficult enough to deal with. Wow, Dak was trying to bring in something else. There are times where it's like it feels overwhelming to think about coming back again and again. So we talk a little bit. We don't spend a whole lot of time, but we do dip into where these ideas first seem to show up, especially on the lineage of what then comes to our own culture. So in the historical record, of course, it's kind of hard to track.
And this is already different from a lot of depictions of quote, reincarnation, because it says the sun god grants bodies in different births according to your deeds. So early in the Indian tradition, it became interwoven with the idea of karma, and that a good deed in a lifetime may gather its fruition in the next lifetime. Or the evil that we do does not die with us, but may manifest in a different lifetime. And you can do all kinds of psychological dimensions of that, because as we lead good or not so good lives, we are imprinting our minds with its traces that will bring forth another existence. And so this has been elaborated in different traditions in different ways, but this is going to be this text is going to be 3,000 years old, minimum.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is we often think like the Fertile Crescent, and they talk about that development, and then over in India about the same time. When you look at a map, and when as they have started to discover in the archaeological record, quite different from what I grew up with, is there's this constant interaction that goes on between these what appear to be very, very far-flung cultures, but there's always somebody who seems to be pretty independent-minded, trekking across those mountains, developing into trade, and the trade isn't just in goods, it's in ideas as well. And so you start to even see some of these sorts of hints, like from here and even in the Upanishads. You start to see echoes of that, like in the Babylonian area, the Mesopotamian area. They discovered a stele around 800 BC, where there is this offering to the gods, to Sun and Mars, of basically, help out my soul, make sure it stays remembered, and let me come back. It's essentially it's kind of a sparse translation. That's pretty freely translating what it said, but
this is also very different from the idea of the soul having some kind of internal software for its evolution, that somehow we're getting better and better through different lifetimes. And each lifetime is a learning process for the next one. So at the end of the whole thing, we're going to be really good. That's actually a fairly modern concept. And it unifies the ideas of karma with, we'll call it the Christian idea of progress.
Yeah, because karma, in its earliest form, you don't see, I mean, you do see good deeds and bad deeds, but you don't see the same kind of judgment.
Right.
That you find, especially when you get mixing those ideas with the Christian ideas, as Joseph said.
Although I do like, I don't know if you're going to talk about Empedocles. I got to talk about Empedocles.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll hit here, so we'll get to the Greek.
Okay,
then.
he's
go,
a favorite
go for
of
Empedocles.
mine.
Yes,
He's a favorite of mine.
He's good.
He was convinced that he had perfected himself through many lifetimes, and that this was his last lifetime, and now he has to purify himself of fire, so he jumps into Mount Etna.
Fascinating.
I'm not sure I'm ready to take that kind of a leap.
That's
Yes, and even before Plato, there's a lot also with Pythagoras. There's echoes, but Plato, for people living in the West, his writings, they're still hanging out in so much of how we assume the world works. And in Reincarnation, you get a lot that affects how astrology looks at it, and through the myth of Ur, where after death and the soul is making its way back, it meets with the three fates, and they are connected to the zodiac and the planets. And one of the things that the idea that occurs, and it becomes this real cyclical, is the ascent of the soul through the planetary spheres, the descent of the soul. And in the myth of Ur, it really outlines the idea of the daimon, a planetary spirit that is basically, well, you can even see it in the old house systems. When you look at that, you have the house of the good daimon and the house of the bad daimon. That concept is coming out of this era of philosophy, and it's, if you look at your astrological chart, all of those different techniques that we're trying to find the Almutin, the strongest planet, the one that's really there, it's connected to this idea that when you come back into incarnation, one of those planets is really, maybe more than one possibly, but at least one of them is your guardian spirit. And it's going to be your help that you can lean on through your life.
So you've touched on there about delineating charts, the astrological charts, to look at these particular themes. So you've talked about the Almutin. Is there any other indicators that you two will look for when you're delineating, or can you explain that process?
I tend to be, the word that comes to my mind is scattershot. I tend to look at the dynamics of the chart in terms of basic themes, conflicts, and things like that. And I'll use that to surmise that this person maybe not intended to be born in this particular body with this particular chart, but this particular body, this particular chart reflects who they are. And so I will look at I'll look interpretively at things that could make for a better life this time around that may hearken to the past. I'm one of my favorite quotes on the topic is, if you want to know your previous life, look at your environment now. And if you want to know your next one, what are you doing right now? And so my focus tends to be the entire chart. I don't like to look personally at like the lunar nodes in that way, although they can be useful and are useful to a lot of other astrologers.
So why in particular do other astrologers look at nodes in particular? What's the reasoning or the thought behind this? Even though you look collectively, you look at the whole.
There's been an evolution over the years.
Yes. In the ancient, you have sort of this idea of the daimon. You also, as you're getting into the Middle Ages and all these materials are being rediscovered, there's this whole concept of the entire group of planets. Like when you die, you give back things in a sense to these planetary spheres, to this divine sphere. And when you come in, each of the planets is contributing to what's going to be whatever your next life is. But so when you're working with the astrology, this is one of the questions also in the idea of reincarnation. Is it just the last life? Is it accumulation of lives? Is it more related to a sense of karma where there's things I need to work out and the soul makes a choice? Is it that the soul was not paying really much of attention? The idea that you get lured in a sense to the physicality of life and come back in, and then you have, you've got this environment and situations to work with.
Are you both seeing this topic becoming more of a resurgent exploration of astrologers, where, obviously in the Western society we live in this very materialistic, scientific dominated world where everything is explained materially? So are you both finding again a resurgence and interest in this particular topic?
Oh, I don't think it's ever gone away.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, here's the resurgence of astrology in the 1800s. It's all embedded with the concepts of reincarnation. These are the authors in the 70s when I came into astrology that were quite prominent in the spiritual side. And then as we're moving forward, we have that same thread keeps moving in different ways. It's much more general until you get to Jeffrey and Stephen, because once you're getting into the modern, I don't know exactly why the simplicity of looking nodes and Pluto became so prevalent, or if it was from that's something you can it's easier to grab onto than trying to figure out the whole chart, or if it was because there was sort of a dip, and they brought back a lot of the spiritual side that at least I encountered in the 70s, and it seems like in the 90s and 2000s when their work came out, it was hitting yet another generation of astrologers. And having a whole, but if you talk to evolutionary astrologers today, there's a whole range of approaches where the nodes and Pluto don't take as prominent a front position.
Yeah, if you look at the depiction of the lunar nodes in Rudier's Astrology of Personality, he ties it in very closely to the prevalent ego psychology of the time. What is your path of personal growth? Where you get stuck? And that actually continued, and it became eventually more elaborate as a means to express spirituality, not just what we call psychology. And I think what the lunar nodes do is they put together the sun's orbit in terms of the zodiac and the moon's revolving around the earth. They have a solar lunar connection. I'm not sure that, I think there are different ways of reading the lunar nodes. And if you look at Reinhold Eberton and cosmobiology and those folks, they have a completely different setup. And so I think this is going to change. It's going to change again over time after, we're gone.
Yeah. And even when you're back with Madame Blavatsky and through Alice Bailey, these are all these are prominent figures from the Theosophical movement, especially Madame Blavatsky. She and her two companions are the real origins of the Theosophical movement in the 1870s. And one of the strong pieces of that was pulling in wisdom from all traditions. And they were very much focused on the Indian ideas, and even based the Theosophical Society, the headquarters in India, for a very, very long time. So we have this melding of the Western considerations on spirit with the Indian considerations. And I think this is the period where you get some of that shift from the concepts of karma, of pulling in the judgment aspect to it much more strongly, where you start to get the lunar nodes involved in the reincarnation. Although in the Indian tradition, a little bit different than the Western that you have, is it's the South node that leads you to enlightenment, not so much the North node, because it's dealing with the muck of life, essentially. And when you think about it, I mean, when I had some incredibly stressful periods of my life and just felt like everything was just dark and black, one of the things that sustained me was working in my garden and just sort of internalizing the idea that, yeah, what do you do to really make a garden grow rich? You bring in manure. You bring in all this stuff that normally you would be going, you would stay away. And I think that is part of what pulled in for me very, very early on in my astrological idea of working with the whole chart as, okay, I don't want to avoid all those Saturn squares, Sun, the opposition here, this and that. But it also comes to a very simple psychological concept. It's often those things we think that are our worst faults, our worst experiences, our worst, that can become fodder for the best, or for at least for a whole new way of looking and growing.
Fascinating. And would it be the view of you two, so looking at it from an evolutionary sense or a karmic sense, maybe, that coming into this particular life now, is it for you two learning lessons in this lifetime based on the chart you're looking at and delineating? How do you view that together?
That's a very important question, Callum, which is why we are hesitating to answer, because there's very specific lines of thinking, almost not tribal lines of thinking, but different schools. Is there an evolutionary intent, is the question. Are we trying to, is this lifetime for me to learn all kinds of things, like how not to make money as an astrologer? I'm not sure I need that particular lesson in this lifetime. Or is it the case that I am here because I was elsewhere previously, and this is where it feels natural and normal for me? And if I live a dog's life this time, I'm going to find a nice doggy life next time. And I like to keep that open, and have people sort of decide for themselves. And it may be an attitudinal thing. It may be a Jupiter-Saturn polarity.
And there's also, I mean, anybody who gets involved with looking at theoretical physics and their concepts of time, how much can we say that there is any linearity at all when it's in the life of the spirit? I mean, some of the concepts that comes out of theoretical physics are far more amazingly imaginative than most of what anything we can come up with. And I will say, even for myself, it was contemplating the speed of light and being inside light that triggered one of my most spiritual experiences. of grasping, you know, that sense of grasping and being part of, I can't say grasping because it was just that being part of the whole.
That's a very interesting point about time and linear. I mean, I'm not qualified to talk about this, but getting down to, you know, quantum mechanics and those experimental observations where things will change, the outcomes will change based on observation and things like that. Again, I'm not qualified to talk about this, but all those different things that you're pulling in are really quite fascinating.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's what makes it so much fun. There's all these things you can contemplate and think about. And
why we can never do the same course twice.
So it leads me into another interesting question, and I think that's one that I know personally I've struggled with, and probably many other astrologers as well, which is the question of fate versus free will. Now, how have you two both processed that particular thought or question over the years in your experiences?
Well, mine comes out of my master's degree in whole systems theory, in general systems theory. And it is so, I mean, it patterned me in a sense, because I can't look at anything singularly anymore. I'm always seeing all these ripple connections. And so when I think about fate and free will, to me, they are again two sides of a coin. It's like music. Music has a structure. Music has these set patterns. And yet you can have a single piece of music that every person who plays it becomes their own uniqueness. You could have two charts from someone born at the same time, but from the moment we are born, there's differences in what we experience, which from that emerges who we are in this particular life and how we play our own piece of music. And so there are things we have control over and things we don't. I don't ascribe to the everything is within our power, because we're not isolated. We're totally connected to everything else. So there are things that, you know, we don't have control over the earthquake that strikes right now, or, you know, or the tornado that picks our house instead of the one next door.
But I love your example of music, because, you know, sometimes we hum through life and we're playing the nice chords, and then obviously we get discord where we're trying to be more in tune with ourselves. So I think music is a great analogy for that.
Well, and when you think about music, like when I think about what are my favorite types of music, pieces of music, I mean, the Rites of Spring, Stravini's Rites of Spring, that caused a riot when he first performed it. It's this amazingly powerful piece of music, and it has these just wonderful melodic that just take you along, and then it has these intense pieces that for actually sometimes for people it can become too intense, and it can make me cry in pieces. But I wouldn't change any of the music, you know. And so we go through life, and all of these experiences that we have, some of which, yeah, there's no way I would have chosen that. But, or at least that's how it feels at the time. But it's all part of what's made me who I am, and I wouldn't change that, because I like all the growing and the lessons I've learned. And I mean, I do think there are times we can, you know, we have sometimes a facile way of saying, you know, oh, we never get more than we can handle. Well, I don't agree with that at all. But I do think that when we have a chance, and I think astrology is really good for that, to have a way of looking at it that gives us a chance to have space between us and what's there, it's incredibly powerful.
I think that's a beautiful explanation. And how about you, Joseph? What are your thoughts?
Oh, actually, they're mostly in line with Enid. I tend to question what it is we mean by fate and what it is we mean by free will, because free will is not doing what you want, because we never do what we want. We always make choices. between givens and possibilities, and that's what we do in life. And we make choices based upon what we know. And I think astrology, along with some other disciplines, enlarges our sense of freedom because we understand ourselves and our compulsions and our habits better. And so once we do that, we have more of a choice of doing the what's out of, quote, out of character.
Yeah.
Of responding with spontaneity and not compulsion. But you know, this takes some personal work, and I think astrology can help by providing a symbolic structure to that.
I think that's a wonderful viewpoint. And, you know, because you read those ancient texts where, you know, we go back from that old deterministic view, and it's like, on this date, you know, you will die. Or so, you know, so maybe older astrologers are very extreme in a sense. So I think your explanations are wonderful. Sorry, Enid, I think I cut you off there.
No, I was just going to take a little bit of objection from the idea that it was totally fated. I mean, the Stoics got into astrology very early, and they do have this sense of, you know, life's their deal. And it's pretty extreme. And of course, the writings of astrologer, you can see that the style of writing, not just for them, but you see it in other works, is there's this tendency, if you're going to have an example, it's always somewhat extreme. It's always somewhat, this is how it's going to be. But when you look at the techniques, they don't really show that, you know, that's how it is. They don't show that sense of determination. I mean, some of them, yeah, there's a few astrologers in there, but in all the way back, you see a lot of times where it's not really so much. It's just, I think, from the very beginning, astrologers wanted to be right all the time. Wouldn't it be nice? You know, economists want to be right all the time. You know, the people who project stuff, they want to be right all the time. And so you keep trying to find, well, this technique, this added piece, I'll get more exact. But the nature of the world of life, of living, is that's you know, it isn't going to happen. You're not ever going to be right all the time. My favorite interplay, I think, astrologically, in the idea of fate and free will, of choice and dealing with what comes, is the part of fortune, part of spirit combination, the dance between those two.
Well, why is that for you?
Because they are this linkage between those three important points, the two lights and the ascendant. And they are that lunar side of ourselves, the solar side of ourselves, and that what is it materially? What kinds of things, you know, when Lady Luck comes, throws the dice at us and says, ha ha, you lost, or ha ha, you won, you know, then what do we do? So, and those 2 points to me are that kind of back and forth between the choices we make I guess I won't say much the choices we make, but the results of the choices we make, or the response to the events that occur.
Yeah, there's an interesting interconnection between the two. And I think maybe people don't know that the fortune and spirit are symmetrical to the ascendant, from the sun to the moon, from the moon to the sun, depending on day or night birth. And there tends to be, in our experience, a lot of overlap, because we may have the fortune of, let's say, having a weight problem, but we can decide what to do, if anything, about that. On the other hand, our choices are always limited by circumstances and responses from the world. And so it's like we're looking at the same sort of dynamic, but the fortune from the viewpoint of what is given, and spirit from the viewpoint of what are the possibilities. And why this is important for our topic is because as we develop, psychologically, spiritually, we are always wrestling with maybe our inner necessities, and we're always trying to expose greater possibilities. And the more possibilities you expose, the more necessities you also find. So there's a cyclical nature that seems to happen in people's lives.
Wonderful. I love your both explanations, and because Joseph, you were talking before about when you're delineating a chart, you're looking at it in a holistic sense rather than going down to the parts. And Enid, just before, you've said about not looking at things in singularity, looking at the whole picture. So it seems to be the sense I'm getting from both of you is really to try and encapsulate everything and see everything in a holistic sense rather than picking out all the time the parts. Is that am I gleaning that correctly?
Well, the recognition that you're choosing from the whole, because you don't stay in the whole very long because it just starts to make you go nuts, right? As an astrologer, and you start to go, oh, this links to that, which links over here, and we've got this aspect, we've got this midpoint, we've got this. So there is a dance between in this ground of the chart that's got so much in it that depending on the question, depending on the focus.
Also, people have different ways of expressing their spirituality based upon what tradition they were born into, what's available, right, what is appealing. And I will, for those particularities, I'll look at the 9th house. I'll also look at the 3rd house, the house of the moon goddess. I'll look at their rulers, and what is the best means for this person to advance. And it's not going to be the same for everyone, nor should it.
And there is a level at which both Joseph and I have a lot of Capricorn, so maybe it's partly our perspectives, but just the plain basic realities of life. When you're working with somebody in a chart, to go to the spirit, to focus on just the spiritual or the potential or the past life can sometimes just not be doing a good service at all, because it's what is that right there in front of them that they are coping with. And there is going to always be some type of spiritual or philosophical component to that. And when we respond to life, we respond to what our ideas about how it ought to be. And both on a sort of cultural level, but also on a spiritual level. So that you can't ignore it, but sometimes to spend a bunch of time there is not going to be doing any help to your client as much help as saying, well, based on this, it looks like you got another year, but it's going to get better. And being able to tell them that cycle that, all things change.
It's interesting. I'm looking at the picture of these 4 people, and I'm thinking about Isabel Hickey, who she was a leading astrological luminary in the Boston area. And unfortunately, she died several years before I got my start. But she has a well-known book in which she'll talk about difficult placements in the chart from the viewpoint of having done like terrible things in past lifetimes, and you have to make up for this kind of thing. And she could be devastating, evidently, in person when she actually looked at a person's chart. But but you can't stop there, because there's always this lifetime, there's always this moment where where things are indeterminate to some extent, and we can play with that indeterminacy.
And it can be devastating psychologically to pull that on somebody. I have somebody very close to me who was told that, oh, he became a tyrant and caused the death of almost a third of the population in his war and being awful. And it was like, why would you tell somebody that?
That's and now we're getting to the ethical component of dealing with clients at that point.
Yeah.
And things to say, but absolutely fascinating. Well, thank you both for your fascinating insight. So going back to the class, which will be on, do people have to enroll by the 20th of September? Can you just explain maybe briefly what students expect to do from week to week?
Oh, do you have the outline, Joseph?
I do.
Yay.
Do I remember where I put the outline? It's somewhere on this desk. Here we are. We begin, and when is the first class? Is it the 20th or the 21st?
I thought it was later than that.
27th, I believe.
27th.
Thank you.
Yes,
27th. What we do is we begin by the ancient Western sense of reincarnation and karma. That's the first week, and we have different forum topics. Usually there's going to be an astrological interpretation. Usually there's going to be something more attitudinal. And sometimes I like to ask people to imagine from their charts their previous lifetimes. How the hell did they get here with this? The second class is, Enid calls it Daimons Are Forever. It's like, who is your planetary daimon who is leading you through this life? Who hopefully will lead you on the right path and not off a cliff. The third week, we work with the Indian perspective. So we'll talk about the background in terms of the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, subsequent schools of thought, and how they inform the theosophical movement. The fourth is on theosophy in general, and we'll talk about Alan Leo and Alice Bailey, both of whom wrote books called Esoteric Astrology, and both of whom have sort of a specific outline for mapping spiritual possibilities. Then the fifth class is, we'll talk about the lunar nodes, and we called it the evolution of evolutionary astrology. And we have an optional sixth class where people could try out all kinds of things on their charts.
Wow, it sounds so incredibly comprehensive and just a richness of information. And you go through all the history and then all the way to the modern day. So that's such a fascinating.
We leave no stone unturned.
Well, we hit the highlights, and we provide a whole lot of reading for people who want to go, who say, "Ooh, this one interests me." So we provide different kinds of reading so that they can get a scattering of lots of different perspectives and find which one makes them go, "Ooh, happy place."
Wonderful, wonderful. So for our audience watching, to reiterate, to enroll by September the 20th, and the first class will begin on September 27th. And we're going to put the link in the description below this video, so you can check that out and register if you would like. And we're also going to have some pop-ups somewhere, you'll see on the screen, to click on there and register. And well, thank you so much, Enid and Joseph. I could sit with you for hours and listen to your insights.
You wouldn't want to.
But if you register, if everyone,
if you register, you can.
5, 6 weeks.
2 hours at a time.
Wonderful. So if everyone watching, if you'd love to join this class with Enid and Joseph, you'll have such an incredible time, which I did a year or two back. So I want to again thank you both so much for coming on, and I hope you come back on again, maybe to talk about the other classes that you will be doing as well.